we raised money to buy 22 acres in Devon, and we applied for 3 agricultural workers' dwellings. We're currently looking for 3, well, we're just shortlisting now 3 people to move on to those plots. The work that we've done is looking at the way in which we can raise money through a cooperative structure to buy land and get planning permission, like I said. We've also done work on viability, because a key part of us getting planning permission on the land is to show that these people can be viable. And then finally, we've spent quite a lot of time looking at the mechanisms that we can put in place in order to protect that land once we've bought it, because we don't want to work hard and for free to get planning permission for new eco smallholdings, for example, to then have it sold out from under us to somebody who just wants to use it for commuting. So we spent time looking at what kind of covenants we could place on the land. So the reason why I'm telling you all this is because those 3 areas we can talk about today, or I can talk about, or we can talk about as a group, and I'm just sort of throwing it out there to the group to find out more. And the third thing was the protection mechanism. I think I'll go with viability first then. This is my son. And also, this lady here was just asking if I talk about how we went about raising the money. So, at the moment, really the only option I feel that we have for getting planning permission for what we call ecological land-based livelihoods, so that's forestry or permaculture farming or biodynamic farming or smallholding, is the agricultural workers dwelling, the forestry workers dwelling permission. And that might change, but I can't see any hope for that changing in the short term. We're lobbying for a low impact development policy like they have in Wales, which is called TAN SIC, which allows people to live in the open countryside if they can show that they live a low impact lifestyle. But for the minute we have to work with the PPS 7 Annex A agricultural workers dwelling, and one of the criteria when you put an application in for planning permission is that you can show that you can be economically viable. Now, fortunately for us, the High Court has deemed subsistence to be economically viable. You don't have to show that you can make the minimum wage, but you have to show that you can meet your household needs, and there is no clear guidance on what exactly that is. So the best bet for that is to work quite closely with your planning officer to find out what they want to see from you in terms of meeting household needs for subsistence. You might need to show them the decision from the High Court which says that all you have to meet is subsistence. Even though it does say that in the policy, sometimes they still are looking for something more than that. And I mean, we found that the planning officers are not used to applications for small holdings. They think it's not going to be viable, and you really do have to win them over, and that is partly why we did this publication. I've got a few extra copies. So this publication, we went round 8 small holdings under 10 acres and looked at the finances. I mean, obviously there's a lot of small holdings out there and they're not all going to be viable, and we found 8 that were, and they varied. About half of them were mixed veg and fruit, so your standard veg crops and salads and some apples and soft fruits. There was a mushroom grower, a seed company that does seeds for the home gardener, and a mixed holding and a chicken hatchery. And they did vary a great deal, but all of the incomes were definitely modest. Nobody was making more than about £10,000 per year. Obviously they were getting some money from their food, that wasn't counted in that. And a bit distracting there. I'm just trying to think what else to tell you about them. I mean, the findings there were that none of them borrowed a great deal of money. All of them built up slowly and gradually over time, and that helped keep the capital costs down, helped them to not borrow a great deal. A lot of them diversified, and a lot of them worked directly with markets, their own markets, or added value by processing on site. There was a great deal of different crops in each of their systems. So, for example, Charles Dowding is one of our case studies. On 2 acres he grows salad, which he mainly provides to restaurants. He does a range of mixed leaves, and he does 4 drops a week directly to the restaurants, and that way he's able to make about £10,000 a year on 2 acres. But he is close to pretty well-off markets that will pay a good price for those salad bags. We found that people didn't need particularly good bits of land. They could be on marginal land. They would build up fertility over time. It wasn't important that they had necessarily a south-facing aspect, and they really improved productivity on all the sites that we found. I'm just wondering if there are any particular questions. I'm worried that I'm heading down a dead end a little bit here. Go on, yeah.
Is that on your website?
Yeah, this is free to download. I brought some copies along today as well.
What is the website?
It's www.ecologicalland.coop. The only reason why we didn't include it in this is because people don't tend to separate their personal and business finances, so it was difficult for us to separate that. But you can make a case for that in your planning application, so I do include it.
What kind of planning hoops do you need to jump through if you have, say, you only have temporary dwellings, so you've got like things like yurts and teepees and vehicles on the road, you don't actually put buildings on things.
So the usual route, if you apply under the agricultural workers dwelling, is to apply for a 3-year temporary permission, and under that you can have anything that fits within the definition of caravan in the Caravans Act. So it can be brought onto the site in a single or 2 pieces and has to be able to be taken off the site as a single piece. Or you can have a wooden structure or a other type of temporary accommodation which is not specified anywhere. The planning inspectorate doesn't have any guidance. There is no national guidance on that. There have been some planning inspectorate decisions that are very helpful. So, for example, if you look at Brook Farm, they deemed a timber frame straw bale dwelling on filled tyres to be a temporary structure. And also at Five Penny Farm, they've got some 20-foot timber cabins that were also deemed a temporary structure. So you can take those decisions when you're making a planning application and say, well, those were deemed to be temporary dwellings. And I feel quite positive about the straw bale route. The foundations element, I think, is a bit harder for us to work out what would be acceptable to planners in terms of foundations, but the gravel-filled tyres were acceptable. And then after usually 3 years, you can apply for a permanent permission if you show that you've been viable in those 3 years. We're asking for 5 years in our application, and that's what the Lammas project in Wales also asked for and got. And that's probably a better time frame for our sort of projects, because we do take a bit longer. We're setting up our own dwellings and we're setting up a whole farm business, and not just, a new flock of sheep, for example, or a new calving.
So you did a case study on, have they established under this procedure?
Yeah, it's about half of them. So if you look at case, I think it's case study 4, Spring Grove, Longmeadow, are 2 that have definitely established under those. Five Penny's not in there, but Five Penny also got the agricultural workers dwelling. Blackdown Farm is not in there, but that's another one. They've got a temporary and then a permanent. And the other route that people go down is to establish the business without a planning permission, and then apply for one when they're a little bit further along, probably at the same time that the council applies for the enforcement notice. And then usually those 2 things are brought together in the appeal. But I've seen some good successes in that route as well.
So you can buy agricultural land and just start producing on it?
That is against planning law, but people do that and have been quite successful. So Five Penny Farm is an example of that, and Blackdown. We have some of the examples on our website under resources. There's a planning section, and I've started to put up all the decisions that are relevant for this sort of work, and I'll be adding more. But email me as well if you want a particular bit of case history on that approach. Ourselves up as an industrial provenance society. And then as an industrial provenance society, we were able to just go and advertise for people to invest in us. So we developed quite a comprehensive business plan showing what we spend the money on, how long it would take. And then we went out and approached people from the ethical property companies, mailing lists, from Tradecraft, mailing lists, all of our networks. And they can invest up to £20,000 each. And we kind of met with moderate success, really. We've got about £139,000. And then we got a bit of an overdraft facility, but banks would not touch us at the moment anyway. And once we have sold this first site, then the plan is to do the same thing again, to prepare what's called a prospectus. It says what we're going to do with the money, and you preferably have about a 3-month window that you give. That's what Co-ops UK are advising, in which to advertise and to receive shares. And I send out a little share certificate, make a list of registers. That's as simple as that, really. And people can withdraw them at a specific notice that you can set out yourself in your share prospectus. And the Cooperatives UK have a lot of help for anybody that wants to do that. And the other aspect that I'd quite like to talk about is the way in which we can protect land once we've brought it into ecological land use. Because, as you can imagine, I mean, we've got all these ethical investors on board, we've got a lot of people volunteering for us to get this project to work. And once we've got planning permission, especially if we get permanent, if somebody wanted to, they could sell it. And they could sell it into anything they want. There's nothing in planning that protects that bit of that dwelling, unless you ask for it to be protected by what's called a Section 106 agreement. So there's a loophole in the law that people use to get the tie from the agricultural dwelling off from the dwelling itself. So what we're doing is we're asking the planning authority to put a Section 106 agreement, which is more binding than the usual planning conditions. And then we're also keeping hold of the freehold, so that the leasehold obliges the person that lives there to not sublet the dwelling, not sell the dwelling off from the land. It obliges them to stay in agriculture, and it obliges them to manage the land ecologically. And we have a system where if they breach that, so somebody we find is not farming, they've just moved out to the city and they're renting it to somebody, we have an action plan then, and we give them a period of time to correct it. And if they don't correct it in that time, we can then take it to the membership, because obviously we're a cooperative. And if they vote that way, we can ask them to vacate within 6 months. I mean, we wouldn't want that to happen, but that's the idea, is that we have some sort of mechanism so that if people aren't respecting what we've set the project up for, then we can use the members, ask them to vote on it, and move them on if need be. And I think the third bit that I was going to talk about, might need a reminder now. Then we did the fundraising and the viability, the planning. Does anybody want me to talk about the route that we've gone down for this one?
Yeah.
So in this case, the first thing that we asked for, this is Mid Devon District Council we're working with, was to have a permanent but revocable permission for 3 temporary agricultural workers' dwellings. And a barn, we've got a PV system, we've got a borehole, and we've got a WET, wastewater treatment system, and improved accesses. At the beginning we hired a planning agent because I didn't feel very confident myself about doing it, and I think, I was just looking over there at Beverly, and she's tried it herself, and a lot of people do try it themselves, and it is a pretty awesome process to go through. And we were recommended to apply for this permanent but revocable permission, even though it doesn't exist in planning policy. And basically what happened was the council just threw it out. They said, we don't know what you're talking about, we don't have a mechanism for this. And the planning agent said, no, ignore them, they're wrong, take it to appeal. And the planning inspectorate said the same thing as the council. So we had to start all over again. And this time I'm working directly with the council, and we've had very productive meetings, and they've said we can't do permanent but revocable permission because there's no mechanism for us to administer that. So the way that the temporary permission works is, once that temporary permission is up, you have to go back to them, and that's a system that they're used to, and that's why they encourage it. So, like I said, we've argued for the 5-year permission in this case, and then at that point we'll ask for the permanent permission. The thing that surprised me is the amount of extra work that we've had to do to get it up to their specifications. So we've had an ecological survey done, and then the improvements to the access, we needed to have an impact assessment done on. We had to submit all the drawings of the barn with the PV on, and where the borehole was going to go, what was going to happen to all the plot boundaries. We had to do something called a visibility display, which shows how the vehicles are going to emerge and how far they can see into the lane to make sure it's safe. And then we've had to do very specific drawings of the plans, particular size, particular standard in terms of quality of the drawing and the numbering and dating and all of that sort of stuff. They have quite clear guidelines, which I think are quite difficult if you haven't got any experience in architecture. or if you don't have access to somebody that can help you. So I would say be prepared to have a bit of a budget ready to do those drawings, and the same with the ecological survey, have a bit of a budget for that. Those are the two areas that we really needed to have an expert in on. Just trying to think if there's any other bits.